The industrial dishwasher's steam hissed like an angry serpent as Marcus Rodriguez wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his wet sleeve. 3 years. 3 long years he'd been standing in this same spot, in the basement kitchen of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel in downtown Chicago, watching fancy plates and crystal glasses parade through his hands like expensive ghosts he'd never be able to afford. "Rodriguez, move faster! Table 12 needs those wine glasses in 5 minutes!" Chef Williams barked from across the kitchen, his face red from the heat and perpetual anger that seemed to fuel him. Marcus nodded silently, his hands moving in the practiced rhythm he'd perfected. Scrub, rinse, stack, repeat. At 22, he'd already mastered the art of being invisible. In a world where everyone looked through him, invisibility had become his superpower and his curse. The Grand Metropolitan wasn't just any hotel. It was the kind of place where senators dined, where tech billionaires closed deals over $1,000 bottles of wine, where old Chicago money met new Silicon Valley fortunes. And Marcus, he was the guy who cleaned up after their dreams. His phone buzzed in his back pocket, probably his mother asking when he'd be home to help with his younger sister Sophia's homework. Ever since their father left 2 years ago, Marcus had become the man of the house, at an age when he should have been figuring out his own life. But Sophia needed new school supplies, and their mother's job at the laundromat barely covered rent. "Table 15's dessert plates now," another server shouted, rushing past with an armload of dirty dishes that clattered onto Marcus's station like a ceramic avalanche. The lunch rush was always chaos, but today felt different. There was an electricity in the air, a tension that made even the seasoned staff move with unusual precision. Word had spread through the hotel's gossip network like wildfire. The new CEO was making surprise visits to different departments. Nobody knew what he looked like, nobody knew when he'd appear, but everyone knew their jobs could depend on the impression they made. Marcus had learned not to worry about things beyond his control. CEOs didn't visit basement kitchens, and even if they did, they certainly didn't notice dishwashers. He was safe in his anonymity, or so he thought. The elevator dinged softly on the main floor above, barely audible over the kitchen noise, but Marcus had developed an almost supernatural ability to hear the subtlest sounds in his environment. It was a skill born from necessity, listening for his father's car in the driveway before he left for good, listening for Sophia's breathing when she had asthma attacks, listening for the moments when his world might shift without warning. At 2:47 p.m., during the brief lull between lunch and dinner prep, Marcus was granted his 15-minute break. Instead of heading to the cramped employee break room that smelled like microwaved leftovers and broken dreams, he took his usual route through the hotel's main lobby. It was his daily reminder of the world that existed just floors above his basement reality, a world of marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and people who moved through life with the confidence that came from never having to count quarters for bus fare. The lobby buzzed with its usual afternoon energy, business meetings dissolving into handshakes, tourists consulting maps with excited whispers, staff members gliding through the space with practiced elegance. Marcus loved these brief escapes, these moments when he could pretend he belonged in this world of possibility. That's when he saw him. An elderly man stood near the grand staircase, his silver hair perfectly combed, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than Marcus made in 3 months. But something was wrong. The man's eyes held a confusion that didn't match his dignified appearance. He was looking around the lobby with the lost expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Marcus slowed his pace, his dishwasher's instincts, honed by years of observing without being observed, picking up on the subtle signs of distress. The man's hands were moving, his fingers forming shapes that Marcus recognized from his high school ASL class, the one he'd taken because Sophia had shown interest in learning sign language. The old man was deaf and he was trying to communicate with the bustling world around him, but the world wasn't listening. A well-dressed woman brushed past the elderly man without a glance. A businessman on his phone walked around him like he was furniture. The hotel staff, busy with their own tasks, seemed oblivious to his struggle. Marcus felt that familiar tug in his chest, the same feeling he got when Sophia couldn't reach something on a high shelf, or when his mother worked late and came home exhausted. It was the feeling that made him step forward when others stepped back. Without thinking about hotel hierarchies or his place in the social order, Marcus approached the man. He tapped gently on the gentleman's shoulder, and when the man turned, Marcus began to sign, slowly, carefully, the way Mrs. Peterson had taught him 3 years ago. "Can I help you?" Marcus signed, his movements deliberate and clear. The elderly man's face transformed. The confusion melted away, replaced by relief so profound it was almost tangible. His own hands moved quickly, urgently, signing back with the fluency of someone who had lived a lifetime in silence. "I'm looking for my table," he signed. "Lunch reservation. Charles Whitmore." Marcus nodded and gestured for the man to follow him. As they walked toward the hotel's restaurant, Marcus caught fragments of the man's story through their continued conversation in sign language. Charles Whitmore was a retired professor, a widower who came to the Grand Metropolitan every month on the anniversary of his late wife's birthday. It had been their special place, and now it was his way of keeping her memory alive. What Marcus didn't notice, as he guided Mr. Whitmore through the lobby with patient care, was the figure standing near the concierge desk. A man in his 40s, wearing a simple grey suit that somehow managed to look both expensive and understated. His dark eyes followed their movement across the marble floor, taking in every gesture, every moment of kindness unfolding before him. The man had been watching for several minutes, having arrived for his unannounced inspection just in time to witness something remarkable. Genuine human compassion in action, performed by someone who clearly expected nothing in return. As Marcus helped Mr. Whitmore into the restaurant and spoke quietly with the hostess to ensure the elderly gentleman was properly seated, the observer pulled out his phone and made a note. Not about operational efficiency or profit margins, but about character, the kind that couldn't be taught in business school or measured in quarterly reports. The new CEO of Grand Metropolitan Hotels had been making these surprise visits to understand the soul of his properties. Today, in a chance encounter between a young dishwasher and an elderly guest, he had found something he hadn't expected to discover, something that would change everything. Tell us, what city or country are you watching this story from? It's always incredible to know how far these narratives reach. Marcus returned to the kitchen 15 minutes later, unaware that his simple act of kindness had been catalogued, analyzed, and filed away in the mind of someone who could alter the trajectory of his entire life with a single decision. "Where the hell have you been, Rodriguez?" Chef Williams's voice cut through the prep noise like a cleaver through bone. "Those lunch dishes aren't going to wash themselves, and we've got a private dinner for 30 coming in at 6. "Sorry, chef. Just took my break," Marcus replied, tying his apron with practiced efficiency. He'd learned long ago that explanations only made things worse with Williams. The man seemed to feed on other people's stress, like some kind of culinary vampire. As Marcus resumed his position at the dishwashing station, the familiar rhythm of his work couldn't quite drown out the memory of Mr. Whitmore's grateful smile. There had been something pure about that moment, something that reminded him why he'd learned sign language in the first place, not for any grand purpose, but simply because Sophia had been curious about it, and Marcus had always believed that learning something new was never wasted. 3 floors above, in the executive conference room that overlooked Michigan Avenue, James Harrison sat across from his assistant, Patricia Chen, reviewing operational reports that painted the Grand Metropolitan in stark black and white numbers. Occupancy rates, profit margins, employee turnover statistics, the kind of data that reduced human experiences to spreadsheet cells. At 42, James had built his reputation on his ability to see what others missed, to find inefficiencies, and transform struggling properties into profit centers. When the board had brought him in 6 months ago to revitalize the Grand Metropolitan chain, they'd expected him to do what he'd always done: cut costs, streamline operations, and boost the bottom line. But today's encounter in the lobby had complicated things. "Sir?" Patricia's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "The department head reports are ready for your review. Should we start with housekeeping or food service?" James set down the tablet he'd been staring at without really reading. "Tell me about the staff retention numbers in food service." Patricia consulted her notes. "Higher than industry average for servers and front-of-house staff, but we're seeing significant turnover in kitchen positions, particularly dishwashers. Average tenure is about 18 months. 18 months. James repeated the number, thinking about the young man he'd observed. 3 years he'd overheard someone mention. 3 years in a position most people abandoned after a year and a half. The kitchen manager, Chef Williams, suggests it's simply the nature of the position. Entry-level, physically demanding, limited advancement opportunities. James nodded absently, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about the careful way the dishwasher had approached the elderly guest, the patience in his movements, the genuine concern in his expression. Those weren't qualities you typically found in someone just passing through a job. "What's our current staffing situation in guest services?" Patricia looked surprised by the question. "We're actually short 2 positions in guest relations. Posted the openings last month, but we're having trouble finding candidates with the right skill set." "What skill set?" "Bilingual preferred, customer service experience, ability to handle difficult situations with grace." She paused. "Why do you ask?" James stood and walked to the window, looking down at the busy street below. Somewhere in the building beneath his feet, a young man was washing dishes and probably had no idea that he possessed exactly the qualities most companies spent months trying to find in new hires. "I want you to pull the employment files for all current kitchen staff." "All of them?" "Sir, is there a specific issue?" "No issue, just curiosity." But it wasn't curiosity, and James knew it. It was something else entirely, something that reminded him of why he'd gotten into hospitality in the first place, back when he was 25, and believed that hotels were about more than profit margins. They were about creating moments of connection for people far from home. Back in the kitchen, Marcus was dealing with his own complications. The lunch rush had left him behind schedule, and the evening prep was starting to pile up faster than he could process it. His lower back ached from standing, and his hands were starting to prune from the constant exposure to hot water and industrial soap. "Rodriguez!" Chef Williams appeared beside his station like a storm cloud. "I need you to stay late tonight. We're short-staffed, and that private dinner is going to generate twice the usual dish load." Marcus felt his heart sink. He'd promised Sophia he'd help her with her science project tonight, and their mother was working a double shift at the laundromat. "How late, chef?" "However late it takes. This is the job, kid. You don't like it, there's the door." The familiar weight of impossible choices settled on Marcus's shoulders. Stay late and disappoint Sophia, or leave and risk losing the job that kept their small family afloat. It wasn't really a choice at all. "I'll stay," he said quietly. What Marcus didn't know was that his employment file was already sitting on James Harrison's desk, along with those of every other kitchen employee. And what he certainly couldn't have predicted was that Patricia Chen was at that very moment researching the requirements for promoting hourly employees to management training programs. As the afternoon wore on, James found himself taking an unusual route through the hotel. Instead of using the executive elevator that went directly to the parking garage, he found himself walking through the main lobby, past the restaurant where he'd seen the elderly gentleman enjoying his meal in peaceful solitude. The memory of that morning's interaction wouldn't leave him alone. In a world where most people walked past each other without truly seeing, he'd witnessed something increasingly rare. One person taking the time to truly help another, expecting nothing in return. It was the kind of moment that reminded him why hospitality mattered, why hotels were supposed to be more than just buildings with beds and restaurants. They were supposed to be places where human beings took care of each other. And sometimes, James was beginning to realize, the people who understood that best weren't the ones in corner offices making six-figure salaries. They were the ones in basement kitchens, washing dishes, and watching the world with eyes that still saw opportunities to make someone else's day a little brighter. If this story is touching you in some way, comment and tell us where you're watching from. Every place has its own struggles, and sometimes it's incredible to see how we all connect through such human stories. By 9:30 p.m., the Grand Metropolitan's kitchen had finally quieted to its usual evening hum. The private dinner had been a success, which in kitchen terms meant organized chaos, followed by mountains of expensive china and crystal that needed Marcus's careful attention. His hands moved automatically through the familiar motions, but his mind was elsewhere, calculating bus routes and wondering if Sophia had managed her science project without him. The last of the serving staff had clocked out an hour ago, leaving only the skeleton crew that kept the hotel running through the night. Marcus was alone at his station, the industrial dishwasher's rhythmic churning his only companion. He pulled out his phone and saw 3 missed calls from his mother and a text from Sophia. "Mom's working late. I'm okay. Did the project myself. Don't worry." The heart emoji hit him harder than it should have. At 14, Sophia was already learning to be disappointed quietly, to solve her own problems, to not ask for too much. It was a lesson Marcus had learned at her age, and one he'd hoped she'd never have to master. "Still here, Rodriguez?" Marcus looked up to find someone he didn't recognize standing near his station. Not Chef Williams. This man was taller, younger, wearing a suit that looked expensive even to Marcus's untrained eye. There was something familiar about him, but Marcus couldn't place it. "Yes, sir. Just finishing up the last load." Marcus gestured to the remaining glasses drying on the rack. "Should be done in about 20 minutes. James Harrison studied the young man before him. Up close, away from the lobby's marble and crystal, Marcus looked even younger than James had initially thought. There were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of long hours and longer worries, but his workspace was meticulously organized, his movements efficient and purposeful. "I'm James Harrison," he said, extending his hand. "I don't think we've met." Marcus wiped his wet hand on his apron before shaking it. "Marcus Rodriguez, sir. Dishwasher, third shift." "I know." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications Marcus couldn't yet understand. "I saw what you did this afternoon. With Mr. Whitmore." Marcus felt his stomach drop. In his experience, being noticed by management was rarely a good thing. "I'm sorry, sir. I know I was on break, but he seemed lost and I just—" "You helped him." James's voice was calm, but Marcus caught something else in it. Not anger, but something he couldn't identify. "You took time out of your break to help a guest find his table." "Yes, sir." Marcus waited for the reprimand, the lecture about staying in his lane, the reminder that dishwashers weren't paid to interact with guests. Instead, James asked, "Where did you learn sign language?" The question caught Marcus off guard. "High school, sir. My sister was interested in it, so I took a class to help her practice." "Your sister?" "Sophia. She's 14. She was thinking about maybe becoming an interpreter someday." Marcus paused, realizing he was sharing more than he'd intended. "She's smart. Smarter than me." James found himself genuinely curious. "What does she want to study?" "Medicine, actually. She wants to be a doctor." Marcus's voice carried a mixture of pride and something else. Worry, maybe, or resignation. "She's got the grades for it, but college is expensive and medical school." He trailed off, seeming to remember who he was talking to. "And you're helping support her education?" Marcus nodded. "My mum works 2 jobs, but it's still tight. Sophia's got a scholarship opportunity for a summer program at Northwestern, but we need to come up with $2,000 for room and board." He shrugged, trying to make it sound casual. "We're working on it." James was quiet for a long moment, watching as Marcus returned to his work. There was no self-pity in the young man's voice, no resentment, just quiet determination and love for his family. It was a combination James had learned to recognize and value, having grown up in circumstances not entirely dissimilar. "Marcus," James said finally, "what do you know about the guest services department?" The question seemed to come from nowhere. "Not much, sir. They work upstairs, help guests with reservations and stuff. They help guests with problems, translation services, cultural questions, accessibility issues. They're the bridge between what guests need and what the hotel can provide." Marcus nodded politely, unsure where this was leading. "We have 2 open positions in that department. The pay is significantly better than kitchen work, and there are opportunities for advancement." Marcus felt his heart skip. Better pay meant Sophia's summer program, maybe even a start on college savings, but opportunities like this didn't come to people like him. There had to be a catch. "Sir, I appreciate the thought, but I don't have customer service experience and I never finished college." "You have something better," James interrupted. "You have the instinct to help people even when you think no one is watching. You have language skills, and you have the kind of character that can't be taught in a classroom." Marcus stared at him, trying to process what he was hearing. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you an interview tomorrow at 2 p.m. with Patricia Chen in Human Resources, if you're interested." The weight of the moment settled around them. Marcus thought about Sophia's text message, about his mother working double shifts, about the endless cycle of dishes and steam and invisibility that had defined his life for 3 years. "What about Chef Williams? He's expecting me tomorrow." "Chef Williams will be informed that you're being considered for another position within the hotel." Marcus felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down at a future he'd never dared to imagine. "Why me?" James smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from him. "Because this afternoon, when you thought no one important was watching, you chose to be kind. In my experience, that's the rarest qualification of all." As James walked away, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts and the last load of dishes, neither man could have predicted how this conversation would ripple outward, touching not just their lives, but the lives of everyone around them. Sometimes the most important moments happen in basement kitchens, between people who barely know each other's names. Sometimes, being seen when you think you're invisible changes everything. Marcus barely slept that night. He lay in the narrow bed he shared with Sophia in their small apartment, staring at the ceiling and replaying every word of his conversation with James Harrison. By morning, he'd convinced himself it had been too good to be true, that he'd somehow misunderstood, that people like him didn't get opportunities like this. But at 1:45 p.m. the next day, he found himself standing outside the Human Resources office on the hotel's 15th floor, wearing his only good shirt and the tie his father had left behind. His hands were shaking slightly, not from nerves about the interview, but from the magnitude of what this could mean for his family. Patricia Chen welcomed him with a warmth that surprised him. For the next hour, they talked about his experience, his goals, and his understanding of what guest services entailed. When she asked him to demonstrate his sign language skills, Marcus found himself thinking of Mr. Whitmore, and his movements became more confident, more natural. "One last question," Patricia said, reviewing her notes. "Yesterday, when you helped Mr. Whitmore, what went through your mind?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Honestly, I didn't think much at all. I saw someone who needed help, and I knew I could help him. It seemed like the right thing to do." Patricia smiled and made a final note. "We'll be in touch within 24 hours. Meanwhile, 3 floors below, Chef Williams was having the worst day of his career. The news that one of his dishwashers was being considered for a promotion had spread through the kitchen like wildfire, and for the first time in years, his staff was questioning his authority. "If Rodriguez can move up, why can't we?" asked Tommy, one of the prep cooks. "Some of us have been here longer than him." Williams felt his control slipping. For years he'd managed through intimidation and the assumption that his workers had nowhere else to go. The idea that someone could escape his domain, could be recognized for qualities he'd never bothered to notice, was shaking the foundation of his small kingdom. But upstairs, James Harrison was dealing with his own complications. The board had called an emergency meeting to discuss his unconventional management approach. Word of his direct involvement in promoting hourly employees had reached them, and they were not pleased. "James," said Margaret Steinberg, the board's chairwoman, "we brought you in to improve profitability, not to play fairy godmother to the staff." "This isn't charity," James replied calmly. "It's smart business. Employee retention saves money, promoting from within creates loyalty, and recognizing character builds the kind of culture that generates positive reviews and repeat customers." Board member David Chen, no relation to Patricia, leaned forward. "Culture doesn't show up on quarterly reports. It shows up in customer satisfaction scores. It shows up in employee turnover rates. It shows up in the kind of word-of-mouth marketing that money can't buy." James's voice remained steady, but there was steel beneath it. "Yesterday, I watched a dishwasher take 5 minutes out of his break to help an elderly guest. That guest has been coming to this hotel monthly for 2 years, spending considerable money here, specifically because he feels welcomed and cared for by a dishwasher, by a human being who saw another human being in need and chose to help. That's the difference between a hotel and a building with beds." The room fell silent. James had made his point, but he could see in their faces that the battle for his vision was far from over. At 4:30 p.m., Marcus was back in the kitchen, trying to focus on his work while his phone seemed to burn a hole in his pocket. Every ringtone from other employees' phones made his heart jump. Finally, at 6:15 p.m., his phone rang. "Marcus, this is Patricia Chen. Do you have a moment to talk?" His hands were dripping with dishwater, but he didn't care. "Yes, ma'am. I'm pleased to offer you the position in guest services. The starting salary is $42,000 annually, with full benefits and opportunities for advancement. You'd start Monday." The numbers hit Marcus like a physical force. $42,000 was more than he'd made in his entire 3 years of washing dishes. It was Sophia's summer program, her college fund, his mother's chance to work just 1 job instead of 2. Yes, I accept." After hanging up, Marcus stood in the steam and noise of the kitchen, feeling like the world had shifted on its axis. Chef Williams was across the room, glaring at him with undisguised resentment, but for once Marcus didn't care about the anger of small men in small kingdoms. He thought about calling his mother, texting Sophia, sharing the news that would change everything. But first he wanted to finish his shift, to clean every dish with the same care he'd always shown, because that's who he was. Someone who finished what he started, someone who took pride in work well done, regardless of who was watching. 2 weeks later, Marcus Rodriguez walked through the Grand Metropolitan's lobby wearing a crisp navy suit and a name tag that read, "Guest Services Coordinator." He'd already helped a family from Japan navigate the city's public transportation, arranged for a braille menu for a visually impaired guest, and yes, provided sign language interpretation for 3 different visitors. But the moment that stayed with him was when he saw Mr. Whitmore enter the lobby for his monthly lunch. The elderly gentleman's face lit up with recognition, and their conversation in sign language drew appreciative smiles from other guests and staff members. Later that day, James Harrison watched from the mezzanine as Marcus worked with a young family whose flight had been cancelled, helping them find alternative arrangements with patience and genuine concern. It was the same quality he'd seen in the basement kitchen 2 weeks earlier, the instinct to help, the willingness to see others as worthy of care and attention. The quarterly reports would eventually show improved customer satisfaction scores, reduced employee turnover, and increased guest loyalty. But James knew the real measure of success was simpler. They had created a place where kindness was noticed, valued, and rewarded, where being human was considered the highest qualification of all. And now that you've reached the end, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Your presence matters, and so does your story.